Every single Monday night, without fail, the same pattern plays out. The recap begins, the weekend gets dissected, and somehow, the version of events that lands on stage always sounds more unhinged than the one before it. But this particular Monday hit differently, because what started as a familiar late-night ritual transformed into something nobody sitting in those studio seats was ready for. What was supposed to be just another routine night of political commentary took a sudden, violent detour into territory that stopped feeling like entertainment the moment it began. The energy in the studio shifted the way pressure shifts before a storm, quietly, invisibly, and then all at once. And before anyone could process what was happening, the clips were already out, flying across every platform at a speed that felt less like organic sharing and more like an explosion with no point of origin. Comment sections erupted, group chats lit up. The internet, which is never really sleeping, locked onto one specific moment with the kind of collective focus that only happens when something genuinely unexpected breaks through the noise. But what made this different, what made it feel like more than just another viral clip cycle, was where the reaction went next. It did not stay online, it grew legs. It walked out of the screen and into a much larger conversation about ego, influence, and the obsession with bending public perception until it snaps. And that left one question hanging in the air like smoke that refuses to clear. What exactly was said on that stage that lit the whole thing on fire? It started with a confession that was not supposed to sound like one. The comment about late-night hosts came out casually, almost offhand, tucked between other statements, the way a sharp object gets hidden inside something soft. Jimmy Kimmel was named. The judgment was delivered bluntly. And the implication behind it, that talent was the measuring stick, that ratings were the scorecard, that anyone could be plucked from the street and do just as well, landed in a way that had nothing casual about it. The audience reacted before the sentence was even finished. A ripple moved through the room, not a gasp, not laughter, something in between. The kind of sound a crowd makes when it is not sure whether what it just heard was serious or a setup for something else. But there was no setup. The words stood on their own, bare and unambiguous, already halfway to every phone in the building before the next sentence started. Because that is the world late-night television operates in now. Nothing stays inside the studio. Nothing lives only in the room where it was said. Every word is already in transit the moment it leaves the mouth. And some words travel faster than others. These words traveled at full speed. The stage at Jimmy Kimmel Live did not look any different that night than it does on any other night. The lights were their usual controlled brightness, warm enough to feel comfortable, sharp enough to catch every expression. The audience filled their seats with the particular energy of people who came expecting to laugh and were ready to be entertained. The desk gleamed. The cameras held their positions. Everything looked exactly the way it always looks. But something underneath the surface was already coiled tight. Kimmel walked out the way he always walks out. Relaxed, unhurried, the kind of confident ease that only comes from years of owning a stage. He moved to the desk like a man who had already decided how the night was going to go. He sat down, adjusted once, and looked directly into the camera with the expression that his regular viewers know well. The one that says something is about to be said that is going to sting a little. The monologue began at its usual pace. Political headlines, sarcastic commentary, the familiar rhythm of taking the week's most chaotic moments and turning them into something an audience could laugh at without feeling completely helpless. It was the formula, reliable, practiced, and refined over decades of doing this in front of cameras, while the country churned through one crisis after another. But underneath the laughs, there was an edge, sharper than normal. More focused, the kind of energy that does not announce itself but makes itself felt, like a current running just below the surface of water that looks completely still. Somewhere across town, a screen was on, and the pressure was already beginning to rise. The Iran situation became the backdrop that nobody planned but everybody ended up using. The Strait of Hormuz, open, then closed, then allegedly open again, with no ships willing to test that claim. A ceasefire was agreed to under a deadline that felt less like diplomacy and more like a countdown timer on a game show. And threading through all of it, social media posts that seemed to exist in their own reality. Confident declarations about outcomes that the facts on the ground were not yet supporting. Kimmel moved through it with the deliberate pacing of someone who knows exactly which details land hardest. He let the contradictions breathe. He gave the audience just enough space to feel the absurdity before he pushed it forward. The ceasefire had happened, or it was about to happen, or it had already been declared a success before it had technically begun. The timeline was unclear. The certainty behind the statements was not. A single-sided ceasefire, he noted, letting the pause do the work, has a different name. The audience caught it immediately. The laughter was the kind that has a slight wince built into it. The sound of people recognizing something true that they would have preferred not to recognize. Because here was the thing. The jokes were landing. They were landing precisely and consistently, and with the kind of accuracy that stops feeling like comedy and starts feeling like testimony. And every time a joke landed, the reaction on the other side of the screen got a little louder. Stephen Colbert was doing what Stephen Colbert does on his best nights, running at full speed through the wreckage of the week's political landscape and turning it into something that looks like organized chaos, when really it is the most carefully constructed kind of commentary. His energy was different from Kimmel's. Where Kimmel operates with controlled sharpness, Colbert operates with theatrical velocity. He builds, he accelerates. He takes a premise and pushes it past where most people would stop until the audience is laughing and slightly uncomfortable at the same time, which is exactly where he wants them. That night, he had material. The Bruce Springsteen photograph came up first, clearly altered, shared publicly, presented as genuine evidence of something. Colbert dissected it the way a surgeon dissects something that should not be where it is, with precise instruments and visible disbelief. The image had been manipulated. The person who shared it either did not know or did not care, and somehow that choice had been made by someone operating at the highest level of public decision-making on a day when the world was watching something considerably more consequential unfold. Colbert stopped, let the silence sit, then delivered the line that already had a second life online before the segment finished airing. The audience did not just laugh. They reacted like people who had been waiting for someone to say the exact thing that was just said. Then the Pope became part of the conversation, and the room temperature changed again. It was not just the content of the post. It was the timing. It was the specificity. It was the very particular decision to weigh in on a papal election with the kind of commentary normally reserved for a rival in a ratings dispute. The claim that the new Pope had only been selected as a strategic move, that the Church had acted in response to an American political figure, that the selection was somehow both unexpected and a kind of tribute. It read less like a political observation and more like something written by someone who genuinely believed the entire world was organized around their reaction to it. Colbert read it aloud slowly, word by word. He did not editorialize immediately. He let the text do the work. The audience started reacting before he finished. Scattered laughter first, then a building wave as the full weight of what was being read sank in. By the time he reached the end, the laughter had transformed into the specific sound of an audience that is equally amused and genuinely unsettled. Kimmel, watching from across the city, was running a parallel track. His version of the same material had a different texture, more conversational, more focused on the visual absurdity of a world where an AI image of a political figure rendered in religious iconography gets posted to an official account and then defended in a subsequent interview with an explanation that raised more questions than the image itself had. Both hosts, different stages, same target, same week, same escalating pile of material that refused to stop growing. And then the subscribe moment arrived, right in the middle of all of it, like a small island of directness in the middle of an ocean of escalating chaos. If you are following this and it feels like a lot, it is a lot. Hit subscribe. Stay in. The part that changes how you understand all of this is still coming. The thing about late-night television that most people forget when they are in the middle of reacting to it is that it is not supposed to feel this urgent. It is supposed to feel like relief, like the version of the news that has already been processed and handed back in a form that does not require the viewer to carry the full weight of it. The hosts are supposed to absorb some of the impact, so the audience does not have to absorb all of it. That has always been the function. The pressure valve, the end-of-day exhale. But something had changed. The exhale was not happening. Instead, every segment was adding pressure rather than releasing it, because the material was not letting anyone off the hook. It was not softening the week's events into something manageable. It was holding the week's events up under bright light and saying clearly and repeatedly, look at this. Look at what this actually is. And on the other side of the screen, something was looking back. The response came fast, not a delayed reaction, not a measured statement released through a communications process designed to slow things down and choose words carefully. It came the way most responses come now. Directly, immediately, and with the full emotional charge of something written at the moment of maximum irritation rather than after any period of reflection. The late-night commentary was not being treated as entertainment. It was being treated as an attack. Each segment, each punchline, each sarcastic observation was receiving the kind of response that implied the jokes had landed somewhere that actually hurt. And that confirmation, the visible, documented evidence that the satire was hitting a nerve, made the satire more powerful, not less. Because once a joke gets a defensive response, it stops being a joke. It becomes evidence. Kimmel pointed this out without pointing it out directly. He let the audience connect the line themselves. The response to the commentary had become more revealing than the commentary itself. The reaction had become the story, and the story was now writing itself in real time across every platform simultaneously. The astronaut question surfaced briefly, almost as a detour, before the conversation absorbed it. The interview clip. The specific question is about communication being cut off, the moment of silence in space. What did it feel like when the voices went away? What happened inside a person when the connection dropped, and there was nothing on the other end? Kimmel lingered on it just long enough for the audience to feel the subtext without it being stated. The gap between the question being asked and the context in which it was being asked. The way certain questions, when stripped of their original context, begin to mean something entirely different, something that the original speaker may or may not have intended, but that an audience, already primed by weeks of layered commentary, was fully prepared to hear. That is the environment that has been built, by repetition, by accumulation, by the constant cycling of clips and reactions and responses that left nothing neutral. Everything arrived preloaded with meaning. Every moment came carrying the weight of all the previous moments behind it. The legal static and the media friction were running in the background the entire time, like a second soundtrack beneath the visible one. Disputes, challenges, ongoing tensions between public figures and the platforms and institutions covering them. None of it is new exactly, but all of it louder, and what stood out was not the specifics of any individual conflict, but the sheer density of them. The sense that the number of simultaneous confrontations had grown past the point where any single one could be tracked clearly without losing sight of the others. Colbert laid it out in the way he lays out complicated things, by naming each piece directly and then standing back to let the combined picture do the arguing. The shipping lanes, the ceasefire conditions, the social media threats were written in the language of a Western standoff. The invitation to partner on a business arrangement with the country currently being bombed. Each element is placed next to the next one, no commentary needed. The arrangement itself made the point. "Are you following any of this?" he asked. "Not at all," his bandleader replied. "Okay." The audience laughed the laugh of people who were also not following it, and were grateful someone finally said so out loud. Jimmy Kimmel's request, when it finally came, arrived with the theatrical sincerity of a man who had thought about this and decided the only move left was to make the ask directly, address the president, make the case, the dinner, the award, the ratings, the destiny. It was performed as a comedy, but it was received as something stranger, because by that point in the night, after everything that had been covered and processed and laughed at uncomfortably, the idea of a late-night host making a personal appeal directly to the President of the United States did not feel entirely absurd. It felt like a natural extension of the blurred line that had been slowly dissolving all night. Where does satire end? Where does political engagement begin? Who is performing for whom? And who, by this point, is actually in control of the narrative? Kimmel held the expression straight. The audience waited. And for just a moment, before the next joke arrived to dissolve the tension, the question hung there genuinely, in the space between the punchline and the reaction. By the time the final wave of the night arrived, the story had already outgrown its original shape. It was no longer about one clip or one segment or one response. It was about a system that had revealed itself across the course of a single news cycle. A system in which nothing is produced in isolation, nothing is consumed passively, and nothing stays in the container it was originally placed in. The satire had become news. The news had become content. The content had triggered official responses. The official responses had become new material, and the new material was already in production for the next night, and the night after that, in a loop that had no visible exit and no apparent desire to find one. Kimmel ended where he began, at the desk, under the lights, with the camera holding on his face. Colbert finished his segment with the energy of a man who has run a full sprint and is already thinking about tomorrow's run. And across every platform, in every time zone, the clips were still moving, still being shared, still being clipped and reposted and stripped of context, and reframed and argued over by people who had never watched either show in their lives, but had very strong opinions about what each moment meant. Because that is the world these stages now exist inside. Every joke is a grenade. Every reaction is a headline. And every headline is already becoming the setup for the next joke, waiting on the next stage, under the next set of lights, on the next Monday night when the recap begins again. If this felt like too much to keep up with, that's the point. Hit subscribe and stay close, because in a world where satire and politics have become the same conversation, the next episode is always already happening. And you don't want to miss the moment it finally breaks wide open.